Hey guys, and welcome back to Betwixt the Books. We have a review for you guys. Actually, this month we're going to be having 2 reviews in a row. Shock and awe. Gretchen has a bunch of things where she's traveling, so we weren't able to do like a big reading roundtable with folks. There will be one next month that you can look forward to, but we're doing 2 reviews this month, which is awesome. We weren't sure what we were going to be doing this time because it technically was an ARC release that Gretchen had a copy of, and then I did not. But I was able to, since we're doing this video now after the book itself came out, go out and grab a copy of Swordheart by Kingfisher. Also, it's a really beautiful re-release edition of this. That meant that we were still able to do this review for you. So here it is, Swordheart by Kingfisher. If you're like, that sounds familiar, it's weird that that's coming out. It is technically a re-release of a book that came out almost 10 years ago. It's not quite 10 years. I think it's like 7 years ago-ish.
2018.
Yeah, so it's been several years since it originally came out. It's coming out with this now really beautiful edition. And I believe also on, at least on their Blue Sky, Kingfisher has said that there is a sequel in the works that should be coming out sometime next year. So if you haven't read it before, now's the perfect time to pick it up and get it. If you've read it already, we'll talk a little bit about that as well, but there is a sequel now in the works coming our way. As our reviews are, it's going to be spoiler free for the contents of the books itself. But we will talk a bit about like what we thought about all of this, and we do always give like a completely spoiler free overall review before anything. So if you want to know nothing going in, we'll each tell you what we thought of this one, and then we'll break down a little bit all the bits and pieces that we really enjoyed or didn't enjoy so much. But I think overall we're gonna be positive on this one. So go. I'll let Gretchen do a synopsis of this one first so that you have an idea of what the general plot is, and then we'll do those spoiler-free reviews.
So, one of the wonderful things about this book is that it is rather a book without a plot in parts of it. But like not in a bad way. There's a way that that's bad, and then there's a way that this is just like a very cozy, like fantasy romance adventure, and that's this one. Which does make doing this bit a little bit hard without getting into like too much of the spoilery things that happen at the end. But essentially, the beginning of this is that our main character, whose name is Hala, she has recently and unexpectedly been made the beneficiary of like her great uncle's estate. And she's not related to him by blood. She was originally married to one of his grandsons, I think, who has since that grandson has since died. And so she was kind of like a widow without like, a place to really go. And her great uncle, this great uncle, was a cantankerous old man, a hoarder of artifacts. And she, when no one else in the family wanted to deal with him, she stepped up and she moved in to take care of him. Um, his actual blood family is full of generally terrible people, and they thought that they would be the ones to inherit all of the wealth. And they are very upset to learn that she has in fact inherited it. So it's a little bit of the plot of Knives Out. If
Mm.
you've seen that movie. Um, but they have basically locked Hala in her room until she agrees to marry one of his other grandsons, who is a terrible person, only out terribled by his mother, who was a genuinely abusive and awful person. And so Hala decides, well, the only way out is to take myself out. Because I refuse to marry him, and there's not really much else I can do. So she takes a sword off the wall and tries to position it to run herself through. This sounds terrible, but it's actually quite a funny opening as she's like going through like the dynamics and the physics of how do you fall on your sword. We'll talk more about the humor, but when she finally gets ready to go, she has gotten naked to prepare to, help the sword go through her. She takes the sword out of the sheath. Blue light just like goes off everywhere, and a man appears who is also incredibly shook to see a naked lady in front of him. The man in the sword, his name is Sarkis, and he has been enchanted into the sword to defend his wielders, usually in battle. As far as I'm aware, most of them, if not all of them, have been men who have been warriors. And so he is like, "Hello, I am the spirit of the sword. I am," and then there's a naked lady in front of him, and he is just like, "I don't know what's going on, and I would like it all to stop." Um, so once there's a lot going on, but once Hala apprises Sarkis of the situation, he's like, "Okay, now I understand my place. I'm gonna help you escape here," and they go on the run. And part a good chunk of the beginning of the novel is them journeying to a city to meet a person who helps them to find a priest lawyer. And then a lot of the rest of the book is them journeying with said priest lawyer back to the town to have a legal trial to deal with the inheritance issue. And then there's more, but too much more will get into spoilers. So that's what I mean about a lot of it being like non-plot. It's a lot of journeying and these little adventures that crop up along the way. There certainly is some battles, some fighting, um, and stuff like that. But it's and of course Sarkis and Hala fall in love. It is a slow burn romance, um, but it really genuinely is a good time, and we can't wait to tell you about it.
Like I said earlier, I think generally both of us are very positive on this one. I think I wound up giving it 4 stars. Um, it's not for any reason that it's like a bad book. Like when something's 4 stars, that's like a really good book to me. Like a 3 stars, most books hits. That's like your average book. 4 stars, definitely a good book. It didn't blow me out of the water. There were definitely some things that I had like a couple of issues with, which we'll talk about. So like it's not a 5 star book either. It's not one where I'm like, this is one of the best books that I have ever read ever. But at no point am I ever gonna be like, don't read this. And I definitely know there are people who I would hand it to and be like, read this, you'll really enjoy it. For all of the reasons that we're gonna talk about. It's funny, the romance is really sweet. Like all in all, T. Kingfisher's writing is really good. That's something that we've known. We've read a couple from them previously, so if you want to see that, we read a horror book because T. Kingfisher writes like fantasy and horror primarily, like sort of back and forth. We read What Moves the Dead a couple years ago, which we really enjoyed, and then we also read Thornhedge, which we were both kind of like meh on. So just that as a background, like this isn't our first T. Kingfisher, but it definitely was one of the better of the bunch that we've read, for sure. Longer than I thought it was going to be because the other two T. Kingfishers that we've read previously were both novella length, whereas this one is like a full, like more than 400-page novel. So if you've read some of the novella length stuff that T. Kingfisher's been putting out recently, this might be interesting to read to see like what they do with a full length book. Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was good. I don't know what else to say there because anything else would be like spoilery, but like it was good. I do recommend it if you are interested in it. I think picking it up is a good idea.
So, like Michaela said, we've read these other two books, and I don't like horror. And Michaela talked me into reading the horror novella, and I was blown away by the writing in that. I highly like I I don't like horror, but I love that book. And so I that's like one that I recommend like all the time. And so when we read Thornhedge, I was like really excited because I was like, oh, I really like that horror book, but I didn't think that I would like it. And this is Thornhedge is more of like a fantasy book, and so that's way more up my alley. And I was like, oh, I'm really excited about this, but then it wasn't as good. It's not bad, but it just wasn't as good. So walking into Swordheart, I was like, this again sounds like something that I would really, really like. But after that previous experience, I was like, what is gonna happen here? Um, I have already recommended this book to at least a half a dozen people who I know love like the cozy romance fantasy situation, who would appreciate the slow burn aspect of it, who would appreciate the humor. Um, I will say that I'm probably a person for whom like I like things to be happening in my particularly in my fantasy books, but I think that this one had such good characters as it was such a good time that I absolutely loved like the traveling and also there were some very like silly things that shouldn't have been silly.
Mm.
Um like I was laughing at one point um and my research partner is like, "Are they kissing?" And I was like, "No, they're hiding a body." So it's like that type of stuff. So again, as someone who for whom I really haven't read a lot of like the cozy side of things because I do like there to be more stuff happening. I was like, never mind, actually, this may have changed my entire opinion. Or it was just this book. I don't know. Um, but yeah, the humor, the characters, the world building, we're gonna break all of this down more, but it just ticked so many boxes for me. Again, I did give it 4 stars because it was really well done, but it did not blow me away in the writing style in the same way that, for example, What Moves the Dead, which had more literary like turns in it.
Mm.
Um, Not that a book has to be literary to be like 5 stars, but I was like, this is a good, solid book. I love it. I will recommend it. Um, and yeah, like I said, I've already just like I finished it and I just started sending it to people. I was like, you've got to read this. So absolutely, if this sounds like a book for you, it's so well done.
Now let's get into some of those like specifics. And I think for me, like one of the standout things in this book is definitely the world building. We did find out that it is I guess it would be considered like a companion novel to some of her other series that she's written, because it doesn't follow like the same characters, but it's set in the same world as a couple of the other series that she's worked on. So if you've like this world, there's other places to go to like experience some more. Some of the standout parts of that are like the really interesting religions that were in here. um Gretchen and I talked about how a lot of fantasy books have, I think there was a quote that you mentioned where like most of the religions in fantasy books are Christianity with a silly hat, which is true. Like it is just like, oh yes, okay, it's like our real world religions again. That's not what this is. This is definitely like a world that has created a bunch of different gods and pantheons and based religions on all of those for different things. So the one that was mentioned as like part of the traveling was the like priest lawyer, basically, Zale, who is a great non-binary representation of a character. They use they them pronouns throughout the entire thing, so again, if you're like a queer book person, this one has representation in it in that way. um Such an interesting idea that there is like this rat god that came up out of a plague, like the Black Plague, where they knew that the plague was causing the problem and that the plague came from the rats. But then the rat god is the god of like a bunch of tiny little things, and that became like a god of bureaucracy in a way, and so they're all lawyers and things like that. So like it's like such an interesting world building element, and that's just like one of the gods that you get to see all of these other religions and gods and like how they live in that world are. There's also some interesting magic elements. There's some non-human creatures. You get to see Brindle, who's like a badger type creature that can speak. One of the highlights there as well. So like it's definitely a fantasy world and it has a lot of elements, and those elements feel like really fleshed out. It isn't just like we're gonna make this a non-human character. That non-human character has different ways of speaking, different ways of viewing the world. They have different senses. Like there's all of these like little things that go into making that creature feel more holistic versus just a human in like a furry suit. Like that's not at all what you're looking at when you look at that sort of thing. So world building, A+, top tier, loved it. Obviously looking forward to the next books to see more of the world and more interesting things there. There was like some history elements that were super interesting. So yeah, stand out for me, world building for sure.
As someone who can find sometimes that the world building in some fantasy novels can be a little much, um, I found that this was like the exact right like level of like deep world building that wasn't overwhelming. While at the same time she's doing this, she's also making an incredible fleshed out cast of characters like Michaela was just alluding to. A lot of books can't do both, especially like, obviously this is an established world, but we've never read the series and that didn't bother us at all. So Hala as our female main character is a little bit older than your normal romance lead because she's 35, so she's ancient. Whoa. But like, she's been married before, she's been through some life, and I particularly that's one of the reasons why I love second chance romances so much is that they not that this is second chance, but like they tend to be a little bit older and have some more experience that factors into their character. Um she has learned to weaponize the assumptions that people have of her because she's a woman. And this is really one of the ways in which Sarkis and hers relationship really develops in a wonderful way. Sarkis is a hundreds of year old warrior. He is far away from his native lands, and he has not been out of the sword in a really long time. So he has to kind of like catch up with where he is, what's going on. And as the novel progresses, you learn more and more about his background and how he came to be in the sword. And it's not a happy story. I don't know why you would think it would be, but it's not. And he has a lot of guilt about how he originally came to be there. But also, like, he's lived so many lifetimes with so many different people. And 9 times out of 10, it feels like the way he tells it, the reason that he switched wielders was, in his words, that he wasn't able to protect them. And so he is really like, Hala is confusing to him because he's like, I've never really not protected a non-warrior. And this is what I mean about their relationship developing, because as he observes her, he begins to realize, what she's learned. So for example, Hala will um be like dumb on purpose, and she'll just like start running her mouth and asking all these questions. And at first Sarkis is like, you were the most annoying person I've ever met in my entire life. And then he realizes, oh, you do this intentionally on purpose when you're like in situations where you feel in danger, as like a smoke cloud, like smoke bomb, boom, run away. And the same thing of like, there's one time they're being accosted by some not nice priest from a different religion. And Hala just starts crying. And Sarkis is like, why are you crying? Right? Like, what are you doing? And then he realizes, oh, it's because like she's like making these male priests uncomfortable. And so him coming to see her is like, oh, a fighter in her own right is really wonderful. And Hala learning what it is to be appreciated, as someone who has really not been appreciated for most of her life. And taking his help and learning how to be helped and be cared for is really wonderful when she's always been this carer. Also, Zale, love Zale. They ended up in the middle of a fantasy adventure and they just wanted to adjudicate some property tax cases. Like, they were just like, I am just here to talk about the law. I think Zale's character is again this wonderful blend of someone who is well and truly a nerd. The hijinks that Zale and Hala get up to trying to like do like scientific tests on Sarkis are just like hilarious. Um, and at the same time, when they do get to the point where they're having the fight over Hala's inheritance, like Zale is able to be like their type of warrior, which is in the courtroom, which is really wonderful. Brindle, as Michaela mentioned, um, is a knoll. That's the name of the character, or that type of being, and his character is also a way for some really great like one liners about how silly Sarkis and Hala are being when they're in their like slow burn phase, and Brindle's just like, you just care about it. This is why you do this. You're silly people. Humans are weird, but also there's like little instances where there's also like racism and classism about how gnolls are different, and then the types of jobs that gnolls are like expected to be in. It's very subtle and it's very quick, but it's just like another layer to that world building, which is really excellent. I know I'm talking a lot about this, but it's just like truly is the heart of the romance, and the characters are truly like the heart of this, because you need to want to spend time with them, like as they literally like do the same journey like what feels like 50 times up and down the road. And the thing that's crazy is that you absolutely want to spend that time with them. The romance is generally fine. We'll talk about some pacing issues later, but this really is the heart of it, and it's wonderful.
Yeah. The other thing that I think that both of us like really were kind of like taken aback by in like a positive way from this one was like how actually funny this book is. It's very funny. Both of us laughed out loud while reading it, and I don't think either of us are really the type to usually like emote out loud from the books that we're reading. So that's like really a sign of like quality writing that not only was it funny, like, oh, I got, yeah, that was like witty, but it was like so funny that we laughed. Like, it takes a lot to make us laugh out loud from a book, is what I'm saying. So I want you to like understand that like the tone that was set up in that opening scene, right? Of like the like comedy farcical way of like her trying to logic through like why she needs to be naked in order to kill herself so that she doesn't catch the sword on her clothes, to create the like, oh, dear god, woman, why are you naked, like moment for Sarkis. Like, what is happening right now? Like, that continues throughout the story. All of the things that are happening, while there are like some like deaths, they were hiding a body at some point, there's definitely like stakes there, and like the safety aspect of it's generally done in a humorous way, or the like tension level is being equaled out with humor in a way that I think is like really well done. So there's definitely like that element too, that if you are look the reason that it feels like a comfort read or a cozy fantasy is that humor element. It's got the romance, it's got the humor, and it leaves you sitting there of like, yes, actually, like this was like a good time. I was just having fun, and a little fantasy comedy type thing that you're going through. So I highly recommend that because it's definitely like super funny. And I think why we would both put this as more of like a cozy fantasy book over like romantasy, even though it does have this huge like world building, like politics, like religions things going on. Like, it has this like really big scope maybe that's like over here, because the story itself is like, again, like a non-plot story. It's very funny, it's heartwarming, it's a romance at the heart of it. Like, all of these like things lead it into more of like, this is a cozy fantasy, which is having its moment right now, right? Like, people wanting to read a book about characters opening up a coffee shop or a bookstore. Like, that's not what this is. It's trying to get an inheritance back, but it still has that same feeling of like low-ish stakes overall, and you just feel happy and good while you're going through it.
So I'm going to quickly recap some of the small things that we took issue with, um, because not no book is perfect,
Yeah.
and there was some things with this that we found to be a little weird. So this is, even though it's getting a sequel, the sequel will follow a different character. So in the same way that romance novels often are like in series, this one is a standalone within a series, which is like this is Hala and Sarkis's, as far as I understand the information about the sequel. Anyway, um, so there was like, for example, we talked about like it's a very plodding story on purpose, right? And then there are some things that just seem to like come out of the blue. And you're like, how did we get here? Specifically, Michaela and I talked about, for like example, the first time that they kiss, and we're like, huh?
Yeah.
Um, because even though it is clearly building to something, it has not seemed to have built all the way there yet. Because during the course of their travels, they will become quite close. But it just didn't seem to they didn't seem to have like gotten all the way there yet before they did that. There were also parts of the plot, again, a lot of this is the journey, right? And there were some side, I don't even call them side quests, like, events along the road, shall we say. Some of them clearly have meaning, and it's like, okay, I understand what is being done story wise, plot wise, character wise here. And then there was at least one or two that we noted in our discussion, and I'm not going to name them specifically because it would get too spoilery, but we were like, what that do? Like, why was it here? It was interesting, but why was it here? And that also felt really odd in a book that again was about that journey, but did have like the overarching like plot to get them to the town, to get Zale, and then to get like there were reasons for doing that, and this did not fit into any of them. Um, and then lastly, there's this thing in romances. If you see my reviews, we talk about this all the time. It's like the 75% of the way through like issue, the couple or the group or the peoples have to go through for some reason. And this one was so weird. There were already other things going on that could have probably substituted for the tension that enacted. Um, but it was like, this is just it didn't make sense character wise, and that's the thing with a lot of like these little tiny like issues with the plot and the characters that were like felt like T. Kingfisher needed this to happen here, so it was gonna happen. Um, but again, I have DNF'd books for this, so when I say they're minor, they really are. Um, and like it doesn't like overall really impact my enjoyment of the book. I will say that I have one extremely tiny nitpick that drove me up a wall, over the wall, and back around. And Michaela was like, I did not notice this at all. So, to be clear about how minor it is.
Mm.
So, dialogue is not necessarily written the real way we speak, right? Because when we speak as human beings to each other, we'll say like, we'll say generally, unless you're doing it for a bit, like it's part of the character, it's part of something, you don't really add it to dialogue when you write because it doesn't need to be there. All of these characters at some point repetitively would use like it would literally be like ERRR in the dialogue to in places. And so it'd be like, I mean, that's not something I would think of. They all did it. It was repeated. I couldn't stand it. And I think part of it is that the places that we choose to pause are very like we wouldn't all choose to pause in a sentence in the same place necessarily. So if you're reading dialogue that repeatedly uses that pause and it's not in a place that you find natural, um that was my problem, was that it kept appearing in places where it broke up the sentence for me in a way that felt super weird, and it made the dialogue just feel weird
Mm.
and disjointed, and I didn't like it. And then there was how often it happened. So again, Michaela had not even noticed this until I brought it up. So it's incredibly minor, but that is what we're reaching for in this review, apparently, because of how much we otherwise just really enjoyed it. But oh, that still really bugs me. I'm gonna be you. I don't want to see that in the sequel. Let me put it that way. I will be upset.
Oh.
I'll still read it though, and I'll love it because let me tell you, the character that they've chosen for the sequel, I am really excited. Anyway, I'm ahead of myself. Take it away, Michaela.
Sort of to wrap this all up, I mentioned it at the beginning, but this was just recently re-released, right? And generally when a book gets re-released, there are some minor changes that go into it. It's not just like we're gonna do a new cover, especially this late on. Like there will be special editions. This one is like a re-release, like it is different. I wasn't sure. I had put a hold on the audiobook like when we had initially talked about doing this, and it had like a week's long wait at the library, and I wasn't sure if it was going to come in time, which is why I wound up grabbing a physical copy. And I think when I was about 25% of the way through here, that audiobook hold came in, so I was able to listen to it for a while. um the audiobook is for the original version, so I was listening to the original version while physically also reading the new updated version. There were a couple of changes, nothing major. So if you've read the old version, I don't think you need to like reread this unless you want to like refresh yourself on the world before going into the sequel. Like there's nothing like major that changed. Nothing in the plot changed, nothing like that. It was a couple of ways of talking about and phrasing, specifically whenever she was talking about her ex-husband, or her late husband, not ex-husband, he's dead. Her late husband. So specifically during scenes when that was mentioned, there was some like rephrasing done in here, and that more or less was the only change. So again, if you've already read it, if you don't feel like you want to read it again, totally fair. Nothing changed in a significant manner. Like the world building hasn't changed, nothing like that. So that's there. Just so you know, if you are like, oh, I'm an audiobook person, again, nothing significantly different, so you can definitely pick up that audiobook. I don't think that it's going to impact you in any way. I quite enjoyed the reading experience of that, so like if you like the audiobook, it was like a pretty good audiobook. There were the character like characters there were super interesting. I enjoyed it. And again, maybe partially because I was listening to it in the audiobook is why I didn't notice those like quirks, was because somebody was saying it to me. So I was listening to it, and people, when you're hearing people speak, do have those quirks of language, so it didn't feel as out of place in that way. That might have contributed to my not noticing it. So yeah, I just wanted to put that out there because I know that some people, when they see a re-release like this, might be concerned that like something major changed, and nothing major did. It's more or less the same book with some slight tweaks here and there. And that is it. That is Swordheart. I'm gonna give it over to Gretchen to put us out for the rest of the night, and hope you enjoy it.
So when I say that I'm really excited about the sequel, the second that I finished this, Michaela can attest, I literally sent her a text message and I was like, if this does not have a sequel, I will throw my phone out the window, because I didn't know that it had been released already. So I immediately looked it up and there was no sequel on like Goodreads, Storygraph, whatever. And I was going to explode. And then I checked out T. Kingfisher on Blue Sky, and they had actually recently, very recently, put out a post about how there was going to be a sequel next year. And they mentioned the character that it's going to be about. I think that's my most popular Blue Sky post of all time, was me being like, "The scream I scrimped" when I saw this. Um, so I'm really excited, um, for the follow-up to this. I really love the idea of it. We both do, and we'll be very excited to spend more time with this specific part of the world and this specific set of characters, because even though, Sarkis and Hala may not be the main characters of this next one, they're definitely related. And so we would love to know if you have read the other books that are series really that are related to this one. So her like the Clockwork Boys books, the Sword of the Paladin, or there's something related to paladins. Let us know down in the comments if you enjoyed those, if you think that we would enjoy reading them, or even just like if there were things that we missed in this book, because we weren't aware of some of those other world building things. We would love to hear what you think down in the comments. Um, Otherwise, as Michaela said, we will actually be back in a couple of weeks with another arc review. So thank you to Edelweiss and these publishers for giving us these arcs. They didn't give Michaela an arc in this case, but that's the them's the breaks. Um, it is a favorite authors month of March here with our reviews, because we will be reviewing the latest Katie Roberts book in her Dark Olympus series, which, as you know, we have had quite the relationship with. If you check out, I believe it was the last book in the series, was not only our lowest rated Katie Roberts book of all time, but it was also our lowest rated book of last year for both of us. So it's a time. And having already read the next Dark Olympus book, I can tell you that one is better, but it will also be a time. So you can set your watch 2 weeks on Friday. We'll be back with that review. Uh, Eventually, we'll be back to doing other content once I stop needing to be on planes every other hour. So thanks, guys, for hanging out with us. Have a great night. Bye.